it's so tricky, especially, yeah, I don't know, because I wasn't there, so I don't know what it was like.
I was.
You were there. Was it bad?
No.
Oh, God.
Justin never has a bad set. Yes, it was the worst set he's ever been on, but no, it wasn't bad. I was there on set. It was, Justin is really kind and loving, and he's like Rain. So you imagine Rain's running a set. It's just, it's a Baha'i set. It's never going to be like that. No, it was just, everything was made up. It was manufactured, and it was manufactured on purpose in order to take Justin down.
When powerful accusations crumble under scrutiny, what remains is a story about miscalculation, privilege, and the weaponization of serious claims. This is not a case where evidence gradually emerged to challenge an established narrative. This is a situation where the foundation itself appears to have been built on fabrication from the start. Blake Lively made headlines when she accused Justin Baldoni of harassment and creating a hostile work environment on the set of It Ends With Us. The allegations were severe, detailed, and widely reported. But what happens when those same allegations begin to fall apart under examination? What happens when recorded conversations contradict the very basis of the claims? And what happens when individuals who are supposed to corroborate the story instead reveal something far different? If you care about accountability in Hollywood, about the consequences of false allegations, and about understanding how narratives can be constructed and then dismantled, stay with me. Because what follows is a lesson in how quickly reputations can be damaged and how slowly the truth can emerge to repair them. Consider subscribing if this kind of analysis matters to you, because we are going to follow this case until every claim has been examined and every contradiction exposed. The first crack in the foundation appeared in October, months before the lawsuit would dominate headlines. A filmmaker named Clara Youb had been working on a project financed by Baldoni and his team, specifically by billionaire investor Steve Sarowitz through the company Wayfarer. The film was titled Empire Waste, and it had started as a modest production with a $2 million budget. As these projects often do, the budget grew. It reached $3 million, then 4, then 5. This is standard practice in independent filmmaking when scope expands or additional investors want to participate. Clara Youb was the writer and director. She had creative control, but she did not have financial control. That distinction becomes important when new investors arrive with capital and expectations. When another production company called P&G expressed interest in contributing approximately $1 million to bring the total budget to $5 million, the terms of the deal required adjustment. This is basic equity negotiation. If new money enters the project, existing stakeholders must reduce their percentage of ownership to make room. Both Wayfarer and Youb would need to relinquish a portion of their profit participation to accommodate P&G. Baldoni and his team agreed to this. They understood that bringing in additional capital meant diluting their stake. They expected Youb to do the same. She refused. According to testimony that would later emerge in depositions, Youb believed the additional $1 million should simply increase her potential profits without requiring her to surrender any ownership percentage. This is not how film financing operates. This is not how any business partnership operates. When an entrepreneur appears on a program like Shark Tank and accepts investment, they exchange equity for capital. The principle is identical here. Baldoni delivered the message clearly. If the budget could not be controlled at the $5 million threshold, and if Youb would not agree to proportional equity sharing, Wayfarer would withdraw financing entirely. This was not a threat. This was a business reality. The conversation, according to witnesses, was firm but professional. It was definitive but not abusive. Yet this became the foundation for what Youb would later characterize as verbal abuse. Here is where the story takes a turn that reveals intent. Youb recorded a phone conversation with Steve Sarowitz without his knowledge or consent. In most jurisdictions, this would constitute illegal wiretapping. Whether she will face consequences for that violation remains uncertain, but the content of that recording is devastating to the narrative that Blake Lively would later construct. In the recorded conversation, Sarowitz speaks candidly about the production of It Ends With Us. He addresses rumors and accusations that had begun circulating about Baldoni. His assessment is unequivocal. He states clearly that he was present on set. He observed the environment. He watched Baldoni direct. And he declares without hesitation that everything Blake Lively claimed was manufactured. Not exaggerated, not misunderstood. Manufactured, fabricated deliberately to destroy Baldoni professionally. This is not a public relations statement crafted for damage control. This is a private conversation between Sarowitz and someone he believed was simply a collaborating filmmaker. He had no reason to lie. He had no reason to embellish. He was speaking freely about something he witnessed firsthand, and his conclusion was that the entire scandal surrounding It Ends With Us was a coordinated invention designed to take Baldoni down. The question immediately becomes why Claire Ayub would record this conversation, and what she intended to do with it. Ayub would later claim she recorded the call because she feared being manipulated during contract negotiations. That explanation might hold some credibility if the recording had remained private, or if it had been used solely as documentation for potential legal disputes between herself and Wayfarer. But that is not what happened. The recording somehow made its way to Blake Lively. How does a private conversation between a director and an investor end up in the hands of an actress embroiled in a separate dispute with that same investor's business partner? The only reasonable conclusion is that Ayub provided it. Whether she did so voluntarily or in exchange for something remains unclear, but the transfer of that recording suggests coordination. It suggests that Ayub had become part of a broader effort to gather material that could be used against Baldoni, regardless of the accuracy or context of that material. Ayub filed a declaration in September of the prior year claiming she endured repeated negative interactions and verbal abuse from Baldoni during the production of Empire Waste. This declaration became part of the public record and was referenced in media coverage as corroboration of a pattern of behavior. But when depositions finally occurred, and when witnesses were questioned under oath, the details that emerged told a very different story. The testimony was specific. Baldoni never yelled at Ayub. He spoke definitively during contract negotiations because the financial parameters were non-negotiable, but he did not raise his voice. He did not engage in personal attacks. He did not demean her as a filmmaker. He stated the terms clearly and explained the consequences if those terms could not be met. That is not verbal abuse. That is communication delivered by someone who understands the limits of what his investors will tolerate. When asked whether Ayub had ever requested that Baldoni be excluded from the set of Empire Waste, the response from those involved was absolute. It never happened. Not once. Ayub never asked for Baldoni to stay away. She never expressed discomfort with his presence. She never indicated that his involvement created a hostile environment. The claim was entirely false. It was manufactured after the fact to align with the narrative that Lively was constructing around It Ends With Us. This is where the legal exposure for Blake Lively becomes severe. If this case proceeds to trial, Lively will be forced to explain why multiple individuals who are supposed to support her version of events have instead provided testimony that contradicts it. She will need to address why someone who claimed to have been verbally abused by Baldoni has no evidence of that abuse, and why witnesses present during the alleged incidents describe them entirely differently. She will need to reconcile the recorded admission from Sarowitz that the entire scandal was fabricated with her own sworn statements claiming harassment and misconduct. The pattern that emerges is one of coordination. Claire Ayub accuses Baldoni of verbal abuse during Empire Waste. Blake Lively accuses Baldoni of harassment during It Ends With Us. Both accusations involve the same production company. Both accusations surface during overlapping time frames. Both accusations rely on subjective characterizations of professional interactions rather than objective evidence of misconduct. And both accusations fall apart when examined in detail. Consider what verbal abuse actually entails. It involves insults, threats, demeaning language, intimidation tactics, or sustained patterns of hostile communication designed to belittle or control another person. Telling a director that a film will not be financed unless budgetary constraints are met does not qualify. Explaining that equity must be shared proportionally when new investors join a project does not qualify. Delivering difficult news in a firm tone during high-stakes negotiations does not qualify. If that standard were applied universally, virtually every producer, studio executive, and financier in Hollywood could be accused of verbal abuse for simply doing their jobs. What makes this especially troubling is the privilege underlying Ayub's position. She was being offered $5 million to make an independent film. She was being given creative control over a project that otherwise would not exist. She was being provided with resources that the vast majority of independent filmmakers will never access in their entire careers. And her response to reasonable equity terms was to accuse her financiers of abuse when they would not agree to fund the project contract on her terms alone. The deposition testimony captures this disconnect perfectly. Ayoub wanted additional money without surrendering any ownership. She wanted the benefits of increased investment without the trade-offs that investment requires. When Baldoni explained that Wayfarer could not continue under those conditions, she characterized that explanation as hostile. This is not the behavior of someone operating in good faith. This is the behavior of someone attempting to rewrite professional disagreements as personal grievances after the fact. The recording that Ayoub made becomes even more significant in this context. If Baldoni had actually been abusive, if there had been screaming or threats or demeaning behavior, why would Ayoub not have recorded those interactions? She clearly understood how to use recording technology. She clearly understood the potential value of documented evidence. Yet the only recording she produced was a conversation with Sarowitz in which he explicitly states that the accusations against Baldoni were lies. That suggests she had nothing else to record. It suggests that the abuse she claimed never actually occurred. This brings us back to Blake Lively and the lawsuit she filed. Lively accused Baldoni of harassment, of inappropriate physical contact, of creating a toxic work environment. She claimed he smelled her hair without consent. She claimed he made her uncomfortable during intimate scenes. She claimed the production became so intolerable that cast members unfollowed Baldoni on social media and that he was effectively exiled from promotional events. These are serious allegations that, if true, would justify significant legal and professional consequences. But if those allegations are false, if they were constructed to serve a different purpose entirely, then the consequences fall on Lively instead. Defamation law exists precisely for situations like this. When someone knowingly makes false statements about another person that damage their reputation and career, they can be held accountable. The standard is high because public figures are involved, but it is not insurmountable. If Baldoni can demonstrate that Lively knew her claims were false or made them with reckless disregard for the truth, he has a viable case. The evidence pointing in that direction is mounting. Sarowitz stated on tape that the accusations were manufactured. Witnesses from the Empire Waste production testified that Ayoub's claims of verbal abuse were false. Testimony confirmed that Ayoub never asked for Baldoni to be removed from set despite later claiming she found him intolerable. Each of these pieces of evidence chips away at the foundation of Lively's narrative. Each one raises the question of whether this was ever about misconduct or whether it was about something else entirely. One theory that has circulated involves the personal dynamics between Lively, Baldoni, and Lively's husband Ryan Reynolds. Speculation exists that Lively may have developed feelings for Baldoni during production, and that Reynolds became uncomfortable with that dynamic. When the professional relationship soured, the narrative shifted. Baldoni became the aggressor. His behavior became inappropriate. The entire production became toxic. This is speculation, but it fits the pattern better than the alternative explanation that multiple people independently decided to fabricate similar accusations against the same person for no coordinated reason. What cannot be speculation is the legal strategy Baldoni has been forced to adopt. He is now in the position of having to systematically dismantle every accusation, to provide counter-evidence for every claim, to expose every contradiction in the testimony provided against him. This is an exhausting and expensive process. It requires depositions, document reviews, witness interviews, and forensic analysis of communications and timelines. It requires untangling what Baldoni himself has described as a chaotic mess of overlapping accusations and distorted facts. But the alternative is to allow the accusations to stand unchallenged. The alternative is to let his reputation be destroyed by claims that he can demonstrate are false. The alternative is to accept professional ruin for misconduct he did not commit. That is not an option. So the process continues. Each deposition reveals new contradictions. Each recorded conversation undermines the narrative further. Each witness statement pulls another thread from the fabric of the accusations until what remains is too thin to hold together. The broader lesson here extends beyond this specific case. False accusations of harassment and abuse do incalculable damage. They harm the individuals who are wrongly accused. They undermine the credibility of genuine victims who come forward with legitimate claims. They create an environment where skepticism becomes the default response even when evidence clearly supports the accuser. And they demonstrate that some individuals are willing to weaponize serious social movements for personal or professional gain. If Blake Lively coordinated with Claire Ayoub to construct a narrative that would damage Justin Baldoni, that represents a calculated betrayal of every principle that movements like Me Too were designed to protect. Those movements exist to give voice to people who have been silenced, to hold powerful individuals accountable for genuine misconduct, to create consequences for behavior that has been tolerated for too long. They do not exist to provide cover for professional rivalries or personal vendettas disguised as allegations of abuse. The consequences of that betrayal extend to everyone. When high-profile cases collapse because the accusations were false, it becomes easier for actual abusers to dismiss their accusers. It becomes easier for institutions to justify an action. It becomes easier for the public to assume that every allegation is exaggerated or fabricated. The damage is systemic and long-lasting. It poisons the well for everyone who depends on these mechanisms for justice. What remains now is the question of accountability. If Baldoni can prove that these accusations were knowingly false, what happens next? Does Lively face legal consequences? Does Ayub? Do the individuals who amplified these claims without verification bear any responsibility for the damage they caused? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary ones. Accountability cannot flow in only one direction. If we demand consequences for misconduct, we must also demand consequences for false accusations of misconduct. The timeline ahead will determine how this resolves. Depositions will continue. Evidence will be presented. Contradictions will be explored. At some point, a judge or jury will be asked to evaluate the credibility of the competing narratives and to decide who is telling the truth. That process takes time, but it also provides clarity. It separates speculation from fact. It distinguishes between what can be proven and what is merely asserted. For now, what we know is this. A billionaire investor stated on a recorded call that Blake Lively fabricated accusations against Justin Baldoni. A filmmaker who claimed verbal abuse has been contradicted by witnesses and by her own failure to produce evidence of that abuse. Testimony has confirmed that requests to exclude Baldoni from set never actually occurred despite being cited as proof of his misconduct. And the individual at the center of all these accusations has been forced to defend himself against claims that are unraveling under the slightest examination. This is not a case where the truth is ambiguous. This is not a situation where reasonable people can disagree about what happened. This is a situation where the evidence increasingly points toward a coordinated effort to destroy someone's career using false allegations of serious misconduct. And if that is what occurred, then the only question left is what consequences will follow for the people who participated in that effort. The answer to that question will tell us a great deal about how seriously we take the integrity of these accusations. It will tell us whether fabricating claims of harassment carries the same weight as committing harassment. It will tell us whether reputation and career destruction through false allegations is treated as seriously as the behavior those allegations are supposed to describe. And it will tell us whether accountability applies equally to everyone, or only to those we have already decided are guilty. What do you think happens when these cases finally reach their conclusion? Do you believe the legal system will hold people accountable for knowingly false accusations, or will the social and professional damage already done be considered punishment enough? Leave your thoughts below because this conversation is far from over. And if you want to stay informed as this case develops, and as more evidence comes to light, make sure you are subscribed, because the truth does not always arrive quickly, but when it does arrive, it tends to be definitive. We will be here to cover every development until this story reaches its resolution.